Hello and welcome back to the HTLP, the Holistic Teaching and Learning Podcast. My name is Gianna and this is a show that introduces holistic teaching and its impact on students and the education field as a whole. From students to educators and beyond, we learn what holistic learning is all about.
In this episode, we sit with Remington Cooney to discuss the integration of contemplative practices in the classroom. Join us as we explore just a few of the many ways in which we can harness meditation to support students and teachers in the pursuit of their passion work. Remington currently runs mindful leadership programs in the Asia-Pacific region, training high-level achievers in the corporate world on how to utilize mindfulness in their busy working lives. To learn more about Remington Cooney, check out his website at taoofnow.com.
Hey Remington, welcome. We're so happy to have you join us today. This is our Holistic Learning Podcast. More recently, we've been inspired both your scholarly work and your presentation about these containers to be so inspiring because we have, the same way I think in holistic education, we've poured our hearts into creating these spaces where we can research and co-create and present about things that are really important to us. And after your presentation, we couldn't stop using the research and the language that you had provided to us to explain kind of the mechanisms that go behind creating these spaces of love or these communities of love. I'll go ahead and pass it on to Anu, who's also co-hosting with us today.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Anu Ayers. I work primarily with the journal, the Holistic Education Review. I've had the privilege of actually copy editing your work for the journal as well. And so I'm definitely familiar. And I'm so happy to have you on this podcast today with us. Thank you so much for joining us. Awesome.
Thank you to you both. It's good to see you again, Jalissa. And I think, Anu, did we meet at the conference?
I don't think that we had a chance to meet one-on-one. I was a little scrambled. So it's nice to meet you.
You guys were busy. You guys were hard at work, so I'm not surprised. There was a lot going on in the foreground and in the background. So I appreciate all of that because, for me to be away from a holistic education community and then to come back into what you guys had provided in that conference was a real reinvigorating time for me. It really got me back to what got me started in this work in the first place. It reminded me of the community that is out there doing this work, although we are a bit more niche than I think any of us would want us to have. We want to be a bit more in the mainstream, but it's good to come back into that. So thank you so much for organizing that conference and for this.
Thank you. Yes, it was so much fun to organize and so amazing to hear the ideas from all sorts of scholars, including yourself. Would you mind giving our listeners a little introduction to who you are and what you're currently practicing?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I just came out of 3 months of training in the Zen monastery. So the fact that I don't really know who I am or what is this, that's the sort of a joke, a koan that they use in Zen. Who am I? What is this? But I do know, some formal titles that I could add to whatever incarnation I'm currently taking. So my name's Remington Cooney. I'm originally from Australia, and I grew up in Southeast Asia, but I studied over here on the west coast of North America as a contemplative educator. So sometimes I wonder what exact, there's different titles for different sort of situations, but I guess what I aspire to and what I have been doing is working as a contemplative educator, as a mindfulness educator, by taking in the practice of mindfulness that I've done in my personal life and bringing it more and more into the professional realm of education, of holistic education, and then working as a mindfulness coach, a mindfulness lecturer, a mindfulness researcher, and a curriculum designer.
Could you give us a little background into how you fell in love with mindful living just in your life?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I had a sense, when I hear the term mindful living, I have my own interpretation of what that means. But I want to ask you first, what do you mean by mindful living from your perspective?
Great question. I suppose how I would define mindful living is living in a state of understanding, an aspect is understanding your thoughts and how to maybe guide them or understand them a little bit better, but also the ability to understand what the right move is. What is the right action to take in this moment to help me become fully regulated and fully in the moment? Would you describe it in a different way?
No, I think some of that terminology I would also use, because mindful living, in a way, it's an industry now. So people have different versions of that. Just like mindfulness, people have different versions. But you said in the moment and regulated. I think that's a large part when we're living with the practice of mindfulness. We're doing our best to return to the present moment. So it largely is about living in the moment. And there is a phenomenon that happens that when we come back to the present moment, when we return to it, frequently we become more regulated, we become more embodied, we become more ensconced in our life as it's really happening, because the life is only ever happening in the present moment. So I would use it in those ways. I think mindful living is really present living in a way that allows us to be well because we are regulated. So again, that's how it caters to the well-being industry in its root. And what brought me into that was the fact that I wasn't feeling well. And I think this is sort of, unfortunately, how people find a lot of the time their way into mindfulness practice, meditation practice, contemplative practice, is they've come through the gateway of distress. There's sort of this, having been training in the Buddhist tradition the last few months, there's a term for it in Buddhism called dukkha. And dukkha is interpreted in different ways, but if we were going to bring that to the modern 21st century, dukkha would be stress. So there's a ubiquitous sense of stress in our lives, and sometimes that stress takes us so far into the spectrum of not feeling well that we look for solutions. And that was my way in. Like, I was only a teenager at the time, but I was having my own experiences and relationship with anxiety, both anxiety, in terms of like concrete examples of it in school, but also more existential feeling of anxiousness. Like, what is my life about? What is the meaning of my life? Mindfulness became kind of like a medicinal thing for me. I started meditating at around 16, 17 years of age, and I found that there was a medicinal quality to being present. There was a medicinal quality to not believing every thought that went through my mind, and to being present. And I got very hooked on this, just this little taste of it. And that was the hook into it. And then over the years, now in my 30s, so over this large period of exploring both a personal practice and then bringing it into a professional realm, I've fallen deeper and deeper in love with the simplicity of this. I mean, mindful living is a simplistic way of being in a complicated world.
It takes a very special type of educator and guide, I think, to have you reflect about the reality that's so chaotic right now.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to ask who our guides were in leading us to these paths of enlightenment or this sense of presence. I'm curious, who was your guide in this experience that you had with noticing?
I mean, there's always a number of, I think, guides on any path, and I think I've had different teachers along the way and different people who've shown up at the right time. And then there's the ancestors. In studying in any Eastern tradition, we sort of believe that there is the ancestors, the masters who have been before us, who are still live on in us and in the teachings. So I would say that some of those East Asian masters that I just fell in love with, like Lao Tzu, Dogen, Zhuangzi, Taoist and Zen masters, they've been guides for me on this journey and getting me inspired in terms of mindfulness, and the Buddha himself, themself, herself, however the Buddha manifested. And that would be spiritual guides. And then, like, in the more practical sense of like teachers in my lifetime, I had spiritual teachers, and then I have sort of had educators who've guided me. So spiritual teacher wise, I had a really great Zen teacher to start with. here in Vancouver. I'm back in Vancouver, BC right now, and this is where I started to study Buddhism. So I had Kim Hoban Hansen, who was my Zen teacher, and Michael Stone, who was sort of a Buddhist yoga teacher and mentor to me. So those guys were massive influences on me. And then when I started doing my master's in education, I had contemplative educators guiding me. So I had Dr. Hee-Sun Bai, Dr. Charles Scott, Dr. Laurie Anderson. They were my three professors, and they guided me through the contemplative education realm.
I'm going to dig a little bit into that. Was there a calling for the niche holistic education, or did you find holistic education?
I think, the holistic education realm sort of found me in a way because, well, maybe it was a coming together of the two, because I just knew I was a long-term meditator, devout meditator. I started to get into Eastern philosophy and Eastern traditions, and I wanted my life to be around the practice and teaching of mindfulness meditation. But I didn't know how that would turn into some form of a career. I think I joked about this at the presentation I gave at the conference, that I sort of just needed at the end of the day to find a way to make money with what I was interested in. And at that point, mindfulness was starting to find its way into corporate entities and education. And so when I didn't really want to go straight to corporate mindfulness teaching. It wasn't sort of calling me. So the education realm seemed a good fit as a person I was aspiring to teach. I just never saw myself quite as like more of a mainstream teacher. I wanted to teach the Dharma. I wanted to teach mindfulness. And so when I did some research, actually it was a friend said there's a holistic education program at Simon Fraser University with your name on it, because it's a contemplative education course. It's the first of its kind, and they're running a master's in that education program. And that's when these two worlds, this mindfulness world that was existing outside the mainstream and the sort of more mainstream world, started to come together for me. And I saw myself as like, yeah, that sounds good. I would love to teach mindfulness in education, and I would love to design programs that do that. I can see that being my thing, as it were. And so I followed that intuition and did the master's program.
Your work in training business leaders to adopt this vibe, what did you find in the first couple of years that was your practice that was really working? Because when I think about private sectors, I think of the lack of freedom and creativity, which is at the core of a lot of holistic academic work and a lot of in practice. It's leading with love that flourishes into creativity.
Yeah, it is a bit of a story. It's a bit of again, like there was certain coincidences that like came together for me to find this pathway that led from interest in mindfulness, master's program essentially in mindfulness. They called it contemplative inquiry, but large component of that was just present moment awareness in the classroom and how to cultivate that. And then and leading with love. I mean, awareness and love are sort of one and the same thing. If we give ourselves full present moment awareness without judgment, or give another full present moment awareness without judgment, we're giving love. That's an unconditional form of love. So present awareness and love are kind of one and the same. And so this was in the master's program, and I studied this, and then I wanted to work in it. And it just so happened that I presented some work at a conference. I think it was like another holistic education conference called the Asia Pacific Holistic Education Conference, and there was a person from Malaysia, a dean or a deputy vice chancellor, I think he was, who worked for Taylor's University, which is in Malaysia, and he wanted someone with the qualification that I had to come in and help in a private education institution, help set up a holistic education or mindfulness component to the holistic education field. So again, stars aligned, offer came. I was in the position to say yes. I left my home in Vancouver to pursue this. And it was difficult because it's, as much as this deputy vice chancellor had a dream to bring the freedom or whatever, the union of holistic education into this private education sector, for profit, strong bottom line kind of education institution. It was a weird experience to build. I don't know how to describe this, but to build a holistic education program within something that wasn't built on the same philosophy, to kind of bring in mindfulness and holistic education into something that was very much built on almost the opposite philosophy, which was, I don't know what the opposite philosophy would be, sort of a very strong capitalistic model. I want to just, maybe I can add a little bit to that just what I've been talking about is that I liked what Julius has said about this creativity, this opening. So I think in the holistic education field, we're working with practices. It's a union of, mind, body, and spirit, or I've heard it put other ways, head, heart, and body, kind of a union in the classroom, the full embodiment. The curriculum's in the full body experience of what we're learning. And with that comes a lot of creativity, a lot of life force, a lot of freedom. But the education institutions, as they're currently set up, have not been founded on that philosophy. So when you try and bring those two together, you can get a lot of friction. You've got a sort of a business that's not built on a holistic philosophy, and you try and bring holism into that, something has to give. Either you have to give up the creativity and freedom that you're coming in with this is how I experienced it. I had to give up the creativity and freedom that I came in as a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, naive, fresh out of grad school holistic educator to fit the model that I was going into. Or the opposite, which is what I was going into, would have to succumb to would have to reform to adopt the freedom, creativity, and boundlessness that holistic educators can bring. And so it's sort of this, or try and find some negotiation point between the two. And, in my time with that particular university, I ended up choosing to leave because I ended up wanting to pursue a role where I had more creative freedom.
Kind of to pivot a little bit, I know that you are pretty heavily involved in our community with, being a writer with the Her and attending the conference. I was wondering if you could kind of reflect on, your experience with that and how that's impacted you and, kind of the importance of that and being involved.
Yeah, I think I've become more involved with what you guys are doing over there only recently. Like, I've always read the Holistic Education Review. It's one of the few journals as an academic that I'm actually interested in and reading. And being sort of connected to the West Coast North American community of holistic education, I've sort of but going to Southeast Asia and doing this work, I was actually quite disconnected from what was happening over here until the last 6 months or so. And so through the journal that you guys are running and through the Holistic Teaching and Learning Conference, it was almost like as I said at the start, like I found my way back into the community here. So I've become more enthused and more active by finding my way back into what you guys are doing. And as I mentioned, that was very reinvigorating. So the what I've taken away from that is I can't really do this alone. And I think I went away from my studies in North America, with the right intention, but with a bit of a hero complex of like, now I'm going to go off and change the world. And that's all well and good. But like, I wanted to do the best I could with the mindfulness knowledge that I learned from my teachers and go over to the universities that have recruited me, and I created some good things in that, but it's really community that is what upholds us in this work, I've learned. And so in going off on an individualistic journey, I learned a lot, but it's in coming back to like a community like what you guys have and do with the work that you do, that's kind of like what fills me up, like what reinvigorates, refills this energy. You know, we spoke about burnout. I think one of the reasons why it's not good to go at this alone is it's easy for an educator to become prone to burnout if they don't have the support system that is really necessary to do such deep work. Teaching is deep work, and then holistic teaching is deeper work in only that it combines body, mind, and soul. It's not just the content, it's like everything. It's an embodiment. So community behind that, like connecting like we did in the conference and getting inspiration and sharing stories and filling each other up in this energetic sense. That's what I would have felt like I've gained so far from being connected to what you guys are doing.
I was wondering, Remington, what kind of work you've done with early educators, where we see teachers either leave the profession entirely or just recycle for 20 years and never have the courage to come back to why they began teaching again. And so I wonder if you've had any experiences with teacher burnout in those early years, because that is something I think is real for us in this apprehension of figuring out whether it's worth it, whether our mental health and burnout is worth the fraction of a salary of a professional salary, or worth the energy that I think we all find value in, but become so scared and anxious in moving further in their career.
Wait, so what do you mean? I just want to ask a question on that. What do you mean by scared and anxious and moving forward in one's career?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to use my own example and my own personal experience with education. I've only experienced to be so loving and to step into an environment and into a career where the container is already set. So when I speak of anxiety, it's a true fear of being planted in school districts that I'm going to hate and I'm not going to align with, and educators that I'm going to be working with for years potentially, who pass on the virus of the mundane, of the routine, which is very scary. I don't ever want to lose the love and the inspiration that I had for education, because I went into it and submitted to the demands of public education. And so I pivoted and I said, how about we just keep learning, keep going to school, keep figuring out what the levers are to ensure that, these values that I found to be so important to me are being exercised in a career that will lead to a fulfilling life.
Well, there's a lot in that, right? I mean, it's like the path that we're walking is modern day or modern, postmodern, I don't know what era we're in, modern educators, 21st century educators. That maybe even education globally is in like the education realm is being redefined. Maybe it's in a bit of like a rebirthing crisis or something, existential crisis itself. I mean, like I didn't know what was really going on sort of in the US and even in North America. I hadn't had my finger on the pulse of what the education system, what's happening in public and private sectors of education in the US. So I was learning a lot from you guys, just bringing me up to date once I'd come over to Ashland and once I was around the education conference. And so my knowledge on this side of the world of what is happening for teachers, teacher burnout, teacher support, public versus private is really limited, and I'm not going to necessarily comment on that, but I'm open to learning more. But like my experience coming into a job as an educator that I was really excited about and prepared for, skills wise, but unprepared for like maybe the harshness or the reality of what it can be sometimes to work in an an education realm where the money, the at least in my case, the university was really trying to make as much profit as possible because it was not doing so well financially at the time. And, the salaries for educators are always quite limited as well, it seems. And we were always expected to do more than one role. Like I got hired for one role, but I was expected to do like 5 when I got there, like sort of 2 or 3 people's worth of jobs in terms of hours and in terms of responsibilities. And I think this isn't uncommon. I think when educators get hired, they end up taking on like 2 or 3 people's worth of work, and larger classrooms, larger classes, etc. And so all of that is like a stark sort of slap in the face when we get into it, if we get into it. And yes, it's true. Like sometimes the container that we've trained in is a safe container, especially in holistic education. I think we're all on the same wavelength, so we all share the same values. So we're training in this kind of container, as I use that language, and I've used that language, that it's this safe space and we're supporting each other. That's the community I'm talking about. And then you graduate from that, you leave that, and you go to another space that might not have the same coherence of values, coherence of energy, coherence of philosophy, and that can be really difficult. But if we've really internalized this practice as holistic educators, there's a lot of strength in there to bring to the next space we go to that doesn't have the same coherence. There's a lot of strength to then start to be sort of a role model of coherence for that space. But the thing about it is, if you just try and do that, this is what I was talking about when I just tried to do that as an individual, trying to role model all these things as an individual, very quickly the energy drains out because you're giving all that energy to the space to try and, so-called heal that space or be creating coherence in that space, consciously or unconsciously. And then you need to go back to the watering hole if it's not in that space and get sustenance before returning to do that work, just like it would be in social work or in medicine for a doctor, for anyone who's doing this deep work. They need to go back and get sustenance from somewhere. So these little containers you talked about, one in Ashland, I mean, maybe it's the university, right? University of Southern Oregon is this healthy, thriving, holistic space, and that's where you get your sustenance, and then you prepare to go out and like give that away. They talk about this in the monastery a lot when I was there, is we're training the body, mind, and the heart in a safe space to do what we need to do. So when we leave that container into not such safe spaces, we have an offering that's going to help create coherence in a very chaotic time and space of the world.
So inspiring. I love that image of watering hole. Is sacred, it's special, and we've, I think, acknowledged that as we move on post grad school, post finishing university, we are going to need each other. And that is one piece of advice that I think was very loud at the conference. It was, when you step out into the bigger, scarier world, make sure you go with community.
Really briefly stepping back and talking more about being present in the classroom and helping our students become present in the classroom and helping them get into a place where they're ready to learn. Do you have a few activities or procedures that you would maybe suggest to educators to use in their classroom to help their students get into that space and into that container where they're safe and ready to learn?
Yeah, I mean, there are different little rituals, class rituals that, at least in the programs I was running, that seemed to really work well, often very simple in setting the container of what that classroom space would be, and in getting everyone present and on the same page. Because of course, when we come into a classroom space, as individuals, we've always got so many different stories going on in our minds about what we need to do next and who we are from before, and to come into the present. It takes a little work. So I guess your question was like, what what would I do personally in the, like, say, the mindful leadership program that we ran in Bali. I would get everyone, firstly, it was kind of like it was like a no shoes on classroom space, because we had like bean bags and carpet, and you could wear shoes if you wanted to, but I like to always like create this ritual of like everyone go and leave their shoes in the shoe rack, and like as you're putting your shoes in the shoe rack, imagine putting all the sort of quote unquote baggage of the mind in with those shoes. You know, you're not losing it. It's there if you want to pick it up later, because we're all very attached to our stories of stress. But you can put them on the shoe rack and come in with like a beginner's mind, which is like a fresh mind. And so they'd sometimes do this. They'd always take their shoes off and then sometimes follow that instruction. Sometimes they'd roll their eyes. But when coming in, I'd always get them to sit down, and we'd always do like a breathing, like a mindfulness minute to 5 minutes of breathing, centering, anchoring. And would you want to do it now? Do you want me to like actually show you? It's very quick.
Please.
Very quick. So it's just sort of breath, body, sound, right? So you'd be sitting either in a chair or in the beanbag, and you just have your spine straight, your shoulders relaxed, feet preferably flat on the floor, or legs flat on the floor, so you feel grounded in the body. And then I just like ring a little bell. I don't have a bell now, but I'd ring a bell. I get everyone to take a deep breath in. On the exhale, close your eyes. Eyes closed, take another deep breath in and let it go. Notice your exhale. And then take a third deep breath in. And as you breathe out, just feeling your entire body relax from head all the way down to your toes. And just continue your breathing at your own rhythm, your own pace. Feeling the breath as it comes in through the nose. Feeling the breath as it goes out through the nose. And just taking a moment to be aware of the fact that you have a body. You have this breathing body. You might feel different points of your body on the ground, on the chair. And just notice that. Still feeling your breath. The final thing is just become aware of different sounds. If there's any sounds around you, what sounds can you notice in this moment right now? And then just allowing those sounds to be breathed by the ears. And then just wiggling your fingers and toes, gently opening your eyes and returning. Simple, very simple.
Thank you. I think you took Jalissa and I, and I'm sure Stephanie, way back. We both opened our eyes and we were like,
Nice.
that was beautiful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So that would be step one. And then the second class ritual would be doing some sort of journaling exercise to sort of get, a bit of self-awareness going. So we might, one I did at my conference presentation was emptying out the emotional jug. So you write down a series of things that you might feel mad about, sad about, glad about, scared of, and grateful for, generally in that order. And you sort of get emotions down on the page that might be getting in the way of being fully present. You might have some stories attached to emotions. And so I'd get my students always to just do a little journaling exercise, 5-10 minutes to get those emotions out on the page. And then once we'd done those two, the mindfulness practice and the journaling, usually the final step to this like class ritual is I'd always really like to start the class with a question that grabbed people. You know, it could be a funny sort of a light question, but sometimes it was like a deep, more philosophical question, something that hooked people in to the learning of the day, or got them thinking. Like sometimes we did a workshop on ikigai, which is the Japanese term for your reason for being, your value system. And I would start the class with, you know, if you had $1 billion, if you had a lot of money, $1 billion, $1 million, whatever you want to call it, what would you do differently with your life? Who would you help? What would change? And this question of inquiry would get the ball rolling in terms of, I'd usually ask people to, you know, I'd crowdsource in questions like this, get people involved, get them thinking big, large, imaginative, and sort of elicit conversation so that the class could get going.
We do a lot of mindfulness moments at the beginning of many of our undergrad, and we get into this mode that learning turns into a very spiritual experience, and it's through practices that just have become routine. Like, okay, we're all stressing out right now, we're all freaking out that we have to do this presentation, and we find that it's as simple as things, right? Taking a breath and noticing. It seems so simple, like it can't be that simple, but we find that it's a lot of work to quiet the mind and to control that part of, and I hate using control actually, but to be with the part of you that's very present is difficult.
As I learned in more recent times, you know, that's what monastic living is largely about. And as I told you, this few months in the monastery really brought me back to that reality. It's really difficult to stay present with all that is arising when there's a lot of entrainment in us for distraction. But it's effective, right? When you get there, when you finally get to that simple practice and you do it, as you're saying, it works.
Yeah. And as much as we explore and give ourselves permission to sit with ourselves or be patient enough to be in silence and solitude, I don't think it's realistic. I don't think it's a practice that could be spread amongst a victim of consumerism, of our high-paced, energy-sucking environments. And
I think what you finished on was a really apt point, that there's a sacred space that comes when we come to be present together, whether it's through dialogue like we're having now or through practice, mindfulness. And there's a kind of a quiet knowing and a heart-to-heart connection that can arise in that contemplative space. And the world we live in, those spaces seem to be becoming more and more limited because of the pace that we move at, the distractions we have, limitations, maybe lack of resources, lack of community, whatever it might be in the different sectors that we exist. Contemplative spaces seem to be harder to come by. Contemplative community may be also more difficult to create. And so, like, after living in a Zen community for the last few months, I was really inspired, but I also felt like this practice here is so deep, it's like not really transferable as it is. Like, I don't think a lot of people would be really into going into that kind of depth, or even like if I came out and of that space and as a mindfulness teacher was like, I just teach that level sort of whatever they're doing in that space, it may not be palatable to your average city goer, layperson. Might not just palatable, might not even be accessible in terms of where our attention spans are and what we have the capacity to be with at this point in time. And so I've come out of that, my own training, with really like trying to build this bridge more than ever between the integrity of these traditions that mindfulness and contemplative practices have come from, Buddhism being one, but there are, I think all traditions have that, and the secular world has that too. To sort of build this bridge that makes those things accessible to maybe people who can't access it traditionally or who don't want to. And my mindful leadership program was very much about that. It was about secular dharma, secular teachings that still accessed traditional integrity. And so now that I'm out, I'm sort of rethinking new ways to bring this into the courses, into the ways I teach, into the programs I run. I currently do offer coaching and consultation through my business, which is the Tao of Now. And that's, it's on Instagram as the Tao of Now, and it's a website as well, taoofnow.com. And that sort of summarizes Tao being the way of now. So it summarizes this sort of transference, this building of a bridge from traditional to modern. But I am in an exploration phase where I'm looking of ways to bridge awakening technologies, ancient wisdom technologies that have been around for so long, how to really revitalize them and bring them into what the modern world is dealing with right now. So I'm looking into collaborations. I'm looking into building more community around that. I'm planning to go back to Southeast Asia for some time. But I'm also interested in what's going on over here in North America.